What is bigotry? Have you heard that word before? Have you known a bigot or seen a bigot on television?
Bigot is somebody that says something or preaches something and then goes against exactly what they just said that they don't believe in.
Okay, I might call that statement ironic. What she said was that a bigot is a person who says one thing and does something else, or they contradict themselves. I would say that person might be hypocritical, but they might not necessarily be a bigot. They could, in fact, be a bigot. But there's a special way that I'm looking for in terms of how we define it. Yes, ma'am?
Is that when someone thinks they're better than somebody else?
Okay, it could be that someone thinks that they're better than someone else.
For certain reasons.
For certain reasons. All right, that sounds like a pretty good way to think about that.
Big-headed.
That they might be big-headed. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
They hate everyone that's different than them.
They hate everyone that is different from them, right? So I am older than most of you in this room. And when I was growing up, there was a television show on called All in the Family. And All in the Family, so a number of other people remember that show too, right? So All in the Family featured or starred this guy named Archie Bunker. That was the character. The main character was Archie Bunker. And Archie Bunker, so you're nodding your head, so you know what I'm talking about. So can you describe Archie for some people who weren't able to see that show? What was he like?
He was just a really self-centered, grouchy old man.
He was self-centered, grouchy old man. What else?
Didn't care.
He didn't care about other people. What else?
He was detestable.
He was detestable.
Redeeming quality.
It didn't seem that he had any redeeming qualities, right? So he talked bad about everybody. He didn't use the politically correct terms to identify people, and he didn't care to because this was his world, right?
Like Bundy.
A lot like an Al Bundy, right? Now the interesting thing is, if you met a person like that in real life, is that someone you would want to hang out with? Probably not. But the thing that I find most interesting is that Archie Bunker, or Carol O'Connor, as the character of Archie Bunker, showed up in America's living rooms for over 15 years. This detestable person shows up in America's living rooms for over 15 years. With all the bad stuff that you guys just said about that person or bigots. He was known as America's favorite bigot. Why is it that show would have lasted for over 15 years?
Because he spoke the truth and truth hurts.
Because he spoke the truth and the truth hurts?
Because sometimes people find it amusing to watch somebody that's kind of ignorant, I guess.
Okay, so sometimes people find it amusing to watch people that are ignorant? Yes.
Well, I was going to say that people felt good, well, I'm not like him.
People felt good and said, I'm not like him, right? So you guys are on the same page. So I did comedy, right? So I was in a comedy troupe, and we did improv comedy. And I took classes to learn how to do that kind of comedy. So you can take classes to be funny, right? And so one of the things they taught us in this class is that there are two reasons that people laugh at things. One is that we think that we're smarter or better than the thing that we're laughing at, or that the thing that we're laughing at is smarter than we are. Case in point, Gilligan's Island, right? So here we have the professor who is making solar panels out of coconuts, but he can't get people, he can't figure out how to make a boat to get off the island. Right? Just absolutely absurd, right? So he's really smart to the point that he's dumb, so we can laugh at him. And in Archie Bunker's case, we would laugh at him because most of us thought that we were smarter than him. Although I will also say that he also spoke the truth for some people. Some of the things that he said were people's truths at that time as we were changing and evolving in the United States. And I would propose to you that he was also a satirical character for us to look at ourselves as Americans, to see where we've come from, where we're going, to ask the kinds of questions. Is this the kind of person I want to be? And if not, what kind of person do I want to be? Right? So he was presented to us in that particular way. Now, the thing I thought also was very interesting about Archie Bunker was that he had a son-in-law that would actually try to bring him real information. Right? So Archie would say something crazy over here, and his son-in-law would say, "No, Arch, this is how it is for real. And he'd give them statistics or data about something. And what was Archie's response to that data, that information?
Sure, meathead.
Shut up, meathead. He'd call him names. He'd make him. He'd try to embarrass him. He'd make fun of him. That information would go in one ear and out the other. It was like water off of a duck's back, right? So it just didn't stick. I don't know if you've had conversations with bigots before. I know that I have, and I've tried to bring them information, and guess what I found? The same thing happens. They can't hear me. And it's so funny because I'm a logical person, so I try to take them down this logical path. And then, they're like, well, that doesn't make sense because of this. And I'm like, well, what about this? And that doesn't make sense. And then finally they get to a point where they get so frustrated and they say, well, I don't even care what it says. This is how I feel. This is just me. Right? When people tell you stuff, listen. Because that helped me figure out how to work with bigots and bigotry. Because I thought that my talking at them, I thought that my giving them information was actually going to do some help, do some work, do some good. When in fact, it didn't. Until I figured out what does. So bigotry, and I want you to write this down somewhere. You have space on something, just write down. Bigotry is an emotional state. So if I have a bigot in my life, they will not be moved by information. What will they be moved by? Emotions. And what is the most powerful emotion to help somebody move? Sounds hokey. Say it. Love. Think about yourself. When you were in love with someone, there are some things that you did that you wouldn't normally do because you were in love. Right? So bigotry is an emotional state. Prejudice. What is prejudice? How does one define prejudice? How do you define prejudice?
Judgmental.
To be judgmental. Prejudice.
It's not judgmental only, it's prejudgmental.
It's prejudgmental.
Before you know the person.
Before you know the person.
You've assumed
certain characteristics, certain plans. You've even mapped out your relationship with that person before you've really gotten to know them. Right? Is prejudice good or bad? It's what?
I think it depends.
It depends. It depends.
Seems to be more bad.
It seems to be more bad than good.
Yeah.
Okay? Cool. So I'm walking down the street. It's 11 o'clock at night. There are 5 guys walking towards me. What decision do I make?
Cross the street.
I cross the street. Why?
Because there's one of you and 5 of them.
It's one of me and it's 5 of them, and I have prejudged the situation. I have been prejudiced. And you would say in that context that was what kind of decision? A smart, a rash, a safe, a good decision. I saw 5 guys. I made that decision. I'm going to cross the street. And you would say that was a good decision in that context. The problem with prejudice and prejudiced people is that they take things out of context and try to apply it to every area of their life. And so it looks kind of like this, right? So in the context, crossing the street when 5 guys are approaching me makes sense. But now I'm in a different context and I'm at the Mall of America. I'm walking down the aisle. There are 5 guys approaching me. Using that same logic that I used on the street, what decision would I make?
Don't look him in the eyes. Different aisle.
I'm going to walk down a different aisle. I'm not going to look them in the eyes, right? So I'm going to change my direction. But the problem is, at the mall, what happens when I change direction? It's 5 more people over there. So now I'm going to turn around over here, and now what do I see? 5 other people. And so what prejudiced people don't remember, or they often forget, is that whatever decision they made in that context may have made sense. But you don't live your life by the exceptions. You live your life by the rules of law, right? And so, so prejudice is a thought. So bigotry is an emotional state. Prejudice is a thought, which means that discrimination is in fact what? An action, right? So we can measure that action. We have rules around what are appropriate actions and not appropriate actions. So what we have is a mathematical equation here. That bigotry plus prejudice equals discrimination. Okay? Now, what we've done as a society is we said we don't want any discrimination. So we're going to just beat discrimination out of people. So for example, I was in a training and a woman stands up and she says, Andre, I want to know why all the people of color are moving into my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. How do you think the audience responded? Yeah. They were like, oh. And why'd they go, oh?
Not something they're used to someone actually stepping up and saying it.
So they're not used to somebody actually stepping up and saying it. And what else? You're not supposed to say colored. Right? You're not supposed to say that in public. You say that around your friend. Anyway, right? But our society has trained us to say when we see that discrimination, don't say that. Bad person. I'm going to slap your hand anytime you do this. But the problem is that we end up creating something kind of like political correctness, right? Where people don't say the wrong thing because they don't want to get their hand slapped. But what hasn't changed about them? The way they think and the way they feel is still the same. And this is why this becomes important, right? So I know that you've been on a telephone call with someone, or a cell phone, or whatever, they're called now, and you're talking to them, and you know when they're smiling. Has that ever happened? You know that they're smiling. You're not seeing them. They're not close to you. But you know that they're smiling. You can act any kind of way that you want. But people know what's in your heart and what's in your thoughts, just like they know if you're smiling on the phone. People try to say, well, I'm not like that, blah, blah, blah. And they say that in public, and we see what happens in their private lives, and they're a mess. They're a mess. Now, what I will submit to you is that we're all doing the best that we can. But it's not enough. We have to do more. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. Any comments, observations about these concepts? Does this make sense? Am I too far out there? What are your thoughts? So it makes sense? Okay. Cool. I didn't want to lose you. I don't want to lose your love. Don't want to lose your love.
Lost battery probably.
You're teaching that move.
Yeah. Don't take my moves.
It's all matters.
So here we go. So here are some truths about people. People can learn, change, and grow. who I am today is not who I was at 17, right? So thank God for that. I've adapted to the world. I've learned a lot of things. I can experience new things or old things in different ways. And so we can always learn, change, and grow. At any point we stop believing that about people, it's time for us to stop doing whatever it is that we're doing, right? So as teachers, this is what we know to be true, which is why we engage folks. All human behavior is goal-directed, which means that people do things because they're trying to get something, right? Working with kids,